Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 335 of the MTGGoldfish podcast. I'm Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and we have the full crew here this week, kicking things off with the owner of MTGGoldfish, Richard. How's it going this Monday, Richard?
Hey, Seth. Doing well. How are you doing?
I am melting from some incredible heat and humidity in upstate New York, but other than that, I'm doing pretty well today. Krim, we have another co-host. How are you? Is it hot out in California this week as well?
Oh, yes. Actually, I was just driving back from Los Angeles, and the hills were on fire, or at least by the grapevine. So, and like the fire was moving down towards the freeway, and it was pretty close. So it's hot. And I have to turn my fan off, so it's even hotter.
So speaking of the fire thing, and then we're a Magic podcast, we'll get into it. Is that normal out there? Like, as someone from New York, all I hear about is like constant wildfires in California. Do eventually you like get desensitized and you're just driving to LA and you're like, oh, like there's another fire coming towards the road. That's, Tuesday.
That
like, is it just normal?
That was kind of how it felt looking at it. Just like, it's fire season starting up. And so, yeah,
it's kind of scary.
It is a little bit scary, but yeah. Well, hopefully it's not as bad this year. I mean, although unlikely.
Well, anyway, we're here to talk about Magic, not wildfires, and we have some interesting topics this week. We have our first look at one of the big new mechanics from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. So we're going to talk some new AFR cards. We have some MODO news about Modern Horizons 2. We have some Arena event news with a look at some fixed versions of banned cards for an upcoming Arena event. So we're going to talk about that, answer some fish mail. But before we get into that, a reminder that our show today is brought to you by Card Conduit. And Card Conduit, you've probably heard about them from us before. They're a great way to sell your Magic collection, and they are offering a new service geared towards smaller batches of valuable cards with a reduced service fee. With their curated shipment service, you can sell your cards at the best available buy list price with only a 5% service fee. And as with all of Card Conduit services, you don't got to sort your cards, you don't got to grade them. You can just safely package them up, ship them out, and of course you'll get a detailed report with the results. So you can check out Card Conduit's curated shipment option as a way to buy list up to 150 cards with fast processing, optimized prices, and the low service fee of just 5%. And right now you can even get a 10% discount by going to cardconduit.com/goldfish. So Card Conduit, they're the easiest way to sell your Magic cards. So thanks so much to Card Conduit for supporting the show. And let's talk Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. So Richard, we got spoilers, kind of. They're all around a new mechanic, adventuring, and dungeons. Why don't you try to guide us through these interesting cards?
All right. So disclaimer, we're about to explain some very complicated things. It's best if you actually look at the cards. You can find them at mtgpreviews.com or whatever your favorite site is. But I'll try my best to explain the mechanics. So we're going to start off with a new rare that has the new venture/dungeon mechanic, and then we'll talk about the mechanic itself. So Nadar Selfless Paladin is a 3-drop, 2 and a white, 3/3 legendary creature Dragon Knight. So Dragon Knight type. Vigilance, when Nadar enters a battlefield or attacks, venture into the dungeon. Other creatures you control get +1/+1 as long as you've completed a dungeon. Now, with the set, there are 3 dungeon cards / tokens. So these are not cards that go in your deck. You put them with your sideboard, but they don't count as your sideboard. So think of them as tokens or emblems to help you keep track of the dungeon mechanic. Now, each dungeon, there's only 3, and there will only be 3. So Wizards has confirmed, like, there's not going to be any more preview. There's none showing up in Commander decks. These are the 3 we get for the mechanic. They are like D&D dungeons. They have a path. Some of them fork off. You can only go forward, and as you enter each room, you get an ability, right? And to progress through the dungeon, you need to venture using, Magic cards with the venture mechanic. And when you complete the dungeon, you may get a bonus depending on the cards you're playing. So we'll start off with Tomb of Annihilation. It starts off at trapped entry. Each player loses 1 life. It forks. The first fork is Oubliette. Discard a card and sacrifice an artifact, a creature, and a land. The other fork has 2 chambers. Veil of Fear. Each player loses 2 life unless they discard a card. Sandfall Cell. Each player loses 2 life unless they sacrifice an artifact, a creature, or a land. And then both paths go into the last chamber, which is Cradle of the Death God. Create the Atropol, a legendary 4/4 black god horror creature token with Death Touch. So shortest path is 3, but you have to sacrifice a whole bunch of stuff. Full path is 4. So that's 1 card. The next dungeon is Lost Mine of Phandelver. Okay, first base ability, Cave Entrance, scry 1. It forks Goblin Lair, create a 1/1 goblin creature token. That forks into the 3rd level, which is Storeroom. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Each opponent loses 1 life. You gain 1 life. And then the last one is Temple of Dumathoin. Draw a card. Go back all the way back to Cave Entrance. You could have taken the Mine Tunnels, create a treasure token. That forks into Dark Pool, which is the Drain Everyone, or Fungi Cavern. Target creature gets -4, -0 until your next turn. That is only the medium dungeon. The last dungeon is Dungeon of the Mad Mage with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tiers. Yawning Portal, you gain 1 life. Goes directly into Dungeon Dragon, scry 1. There's 2 forks. Goblin Bazaar, create a treasure token. That feeds into Lost Level, scry 2. Lost Level forks again into Runestone Caverns, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play them. Or Muriel's Grave, create 2 1/1 black skeleton creature tokens. That combines into Deep Mines, scry 3. The last level of the dungeon is draw 3 cards, reveal them. You may cast one of them without paying its mana cost. And then the only thing we didn't touch was, I think, Dungeon Level had a fork in it. Twisted Caverns, target creature can't attack until your next turn. But if basically the longest dungeon at the end, you draw 3, you get to play 1 for free.
Oh,
did you guys understand any of that? So much text.
So
I am looking
yes.
at the cards. I'm looking at the cards, which helps a lot. Like, really, truly, like, I'm sure it's very confusing to just hear that read out. If you look at them, it is a lot more intuitive. So look them up on MTG Previews or wherever and follow along with what Richard's saying, and it'll probably actually make sense to you.
So they're all minor effects, right? Like scry 1, create a goblin token. And then as you progressively get lower into each dungeon, they become more powerful, right? One of them is like draw a card. One of them is draw 3, play 1 for free. Or like scry 3, create a 4/4 creature token with Death Touch. So you get rewarded. And then on top of that, your actual cards get rewards for completing the dungeon. Also note, you can't go back. So once you choose the fork, you can't like go back and go the other way. Your opponents can't interact with this in any way. It's just like a token or an emblem. Like they can't like disenchant it or anything like that. Like you just go through your dungeon, and you have access to all 3 at all times, as long as you haven't started a dungeon. So the first time you start a dungeon, you can choose which dungeon to start and then follow through to completion. So
and then
all the way back to our 3
you
drop.
can start again. Yeah.
Yes. A 3-mana 3/3 that pumps as long as you complete a dungeon. It attacks or ventures on attack or ETB.
I think that.
Oh, go ahead, Grim. Go ahead.
I think this mechanic, first off, is very cool. I think this is such a sick mechanic, and like Nadar seems like that if things are triggering you to get through the to like venture and whatnot and get through a dungeon every time it enters the battlefield and attacks, I think this is a lot of value added in. Like Nadar seems really good. Or is that just me? I mean, like, I know this seems like it's kind of slow because essentially you have to, it depends, right? Because I mean, Eldraine will be here, so a lot of this won't matter. But like the thing here is I am excited to see, Eldraine will still be here. But like I am excited to see what it's like because the shortest path is 3 levels, 3 tiers. And it seems like that's the best one to have to go through on an aggro deck. The Mad Mage one seems great for a control deck. So there's just a lot here, and like I'm excited to see what else happens with venturing. but Nadar seems good. Nadar seems sweet.
Yeah, and there are payoffs for completing the dungeons too, like Nadar, and we've seen some other ones as well. I think it's so difficult to evaluate this mechanic without seeing more of it, because it is, in my opinion, like peak parasitic mechanic. Like Venture interacts with dungeons, dungeons interact with Venture. They don't really interact with anything else. So the mechanic is either going to be strong enough to be, if it is strong, I think it's going to be very strong. On the other hand, like if the Venture cards, maybe Nader's the best of the bunch, if that's like the most efficient best one and the rest of them are mostly like draft chaff, then maybe you're not venturing in Standard. I tend to lean on the side that I expect this mechanic to be really good. It's hard for me to imagine that Wizards is going to make a set focused on D&D, in part probably to advertise one of their other IPs in D&D, and they're going to have this like dungeon mechanic be the big thing that they spoiled first, and then they're going to make all the cards so bad that they're unplayable in Standard. So my guess, this ends up being a pretty strong, if not right now with Eldraine still out, because Eldraine is just like off the charts broken, but if not right now, I expect this to be a strong mechanic after rotation, but that's with the asterisk that we really got to see how many Venture cards there are, how good they are. Are they like energy? Like energy, it reminds me of energy in the sense that like you have this mechanic that's kind of a resource that your opponent can't interact with at all, and you could just play a ton of Venture cards and try to rush through dungeons as quickly as possible, similar to building up your energy and spinning an Aetherworks Marvel or something. Are we gonna have like Rogue Refiners and other cards that are like, hey, this is already a good card and it just happens to make energy for some reason? Or are the cards gonna have a tax on them similar to maybe Learn Lesson, where you're tutoring out 3 mana lightning bolts instead of 2 mana lightning bolts, so you're paying a tax for like the flexibility it offers? My guess that it is that it's going to be good, but it's just so hard to evaluate with like a tiny handful of Venture cards to look at so far.
Yeah, so I really like the flavor of these cards. You know, down to the look, what they look like, how they feel. It really does feel like you're dungeon crawling. So I absolutely love that part. What I don't like is the color pie break. These cards have no cost associated with them. There's no color, there's no deck restriction. So what that means is your mono white deck can play or can use Dungeon of the Mad Mage, which has a straight up draw 3 cards, reveal them, cast one of them without paying its mana cost. In practicality, you could play like say White Weenie, play Tomb of Annihilation 99% of the time. That's the shortest path, gets you a 4/4. And then for, you know, if you match up against mono red or something and you're the go long deck, you switch into White Weenie control by dungeoning up the Mad Mage and scrying 3 and drawing 3 cards and going long. That feels weird. I don't know how I like that. I think that makes the mechanic incredibly strong though. I can imagine they put like, let's say they put a Search for a Scanta type land, where it's just like a land you pay 2 to venture or something. Like I could see people playing that without the rest of the venture mechanic, just to, you know, randomly go through the dungeon of Mad Mage with your land, or like maybe like a Snapcaster type creature, like just like a really dorky creature that probably won't get there by itself, but as a control deck, you just slap it down and then just keep attacking to venture and like go through your dungeon. So I don't know. I feel it's parasitic, but it's not that parasitic. Like a single card with Venture is enough, right? A repeatable source of Venture is enough for you to play it. And if they make a card strong enough, I think it'd go back to see play in like non-standard formats. So it's going to depend on what we see. But I think the actual Paladin here, we need a curve. Like if we had a Doom Traveler followed by like a 2-drop Venture into this thing, I think that'd be a pretty good curve where you could sack it to Oubliette, still have a creature on your when you actually untap an attack, you actually get your Anthem off, get a 4/4. And I would assume they have a 2-drop Venture creature. Hopefully it's playable.
I mean, with a food deck or something like that, it's not hard for you to sack an artifact or a creature and a land.
You don't have, like if you don't have the artifact, you don't have to sack it.
Yeah.
Or do you?
Just Armageddon yourself and then you're good. Don't have to sack the land.
I think Oubliette, like that Tomb of Annihilation, that seems pretty solid in a sacrifice deck. So
yeah, and it is just the shortest pathway if you just care about having a dungeon complete. We have some other cards that are maybe not super constructed playable, well, like dungeon crawlers, like a grave crawler that comes back from your graveyard when you complete a dungeon. So like that's another payoff. Or so it's going to depend. Like maybe there's enough of these cards that you just want to complete a dungeon. Maybe that's a theme of your deck because all your cards are going to be doing these insane things if a dungeon's completed, and then going through your obligate and getting there quickly. That doesn't sound that bad. Like 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, if they all had Venture, ETB, like we don't know that those cards will exist, but that would complete a dungeon by itself if you're willing to go through Obligate, which is actually potentially pretty powerful. Also, the other thing about this mechanic is it's really flexible. I really like the flexibility. Like if you're an aggro deck, Tomb of Annihilation gives you a lot of ways to potentially damage your opponent. Like worst case, you're having each player lose 1 with the very first Venture, and then you're ending with a 4/4, which is a good threat. So if you're trying to aggro, that seems like an easy choice. But if you're a control deck or trying to stabilize, you have Dungeon of the Mad Mage. We're going to gain some life. You're going to do some scrying. You're going to make it so a creature can't attack you. So there is a lot of flexibility, I think, that's inherent in how this mechanic is designed. If anything, I'm worried that the mechanic could end up being too strong rather than not strong enough. Obviously, that's super speculative, but I think the mechanic has potential to be really strong.
I mean, yeah, like as you know, mentioned earlier, I just don't see this sucking because, you know, the entire thing about this D&D set is, you know, well, adventuring and through dungeons and like, you know, all that stuff, right? So, I mean, like that, there's no way something like that would just be terrible. So
big monsters mutate.
Okay, but mutate, that doesn't count. Okay, like that's not real.
And mutate ended up being good. It took forever, but people are playing mutate tournament decks now, so it got there eventually.
Eventually, yeah. But yeah, I think that a lot of this, like, it will require Eldraine to leave. I don't know. I still feel that way, but we'll see what happens after release.
Yeah. I think Mad Mage is the best dungeon, but that point is moot because you get access to all 3 dungeons at all times, right? So you can choose whatever you want. But that thing has a draw 2 at Runestone Caverns, a scry 3, a draw 3, a scry 2, a scry 1, create a treasure. Like they're all actually really good. Like you might actually spend mana and a card for some of these levels. So there's a lot of card advantage into Mad Mage, and I feel like that's the card that's gonna break the mechanic. If so, like this is the one that everyone will get normally, where you just have this really powerful engine that people can't interact with. So we'll see how the cards play out, but there's a lot of card advantage in Mad Mage Dungeon.
Yeah, I would say that would be the best of the bunch too, just like in the dark, but it really depends on the scenario. And part of what makes the mechanic potentially powerful is in some scenarios, like maybe you're getting Dungeon of the Mad Mage 80% of the time, but then that other 10%, you're going to really want the Tomb of Annihilation to close out the game, or maybe the Lost Mine of Phandelver because I don't know, that one's kind of bad. I don't know why would you ever get Lost Mine of Phandelver? Like what is the upside of that one? Like, can you ever imagine choosing that one over the other options?
But at only 4 levels?
Yeah.
You want to complete the dungeon, but not as crazy as Tomb of Annihilation.
Okay, I guess I could see that. Yeah, I guess that would be the upside, is if you care a lot about having a dungeon complete, you can complete it in just 4 levels without going through Obligate and sacrificing all your stuff. So if you can't afford to sacrifice it, it's probably a better option to just have a dungeon complete than Tomb of Annihilation, I'd say.
I mean, it's ramp for everybody, right? You could make a treasure token. So
yeah, that color pie implications are very interesting. That, as Richard mentioned earlier, like, wow, now everyone can ramp, everyone can draw cards, everyone can omniscience, or do these things that traditionally are associated with only some colors rather than all colors. I mean, there's also some fairly generic ones, like everyone can scry or whatever, but it'll be interesting. And I wonder if that'll make these cards very playable in Commander. Like in Commander, I guess we'll have to see if there's a critical mass of venture cards. It being only from one set right now might be a problem. Like, can you build a mono white Venture deck? Will there even be enough Venture cards that exist in white to build a deck out of it in Commander? Maybe not, but being able to get like card draw in your mono white deck, ramp in your mono white deck, it does do a lot of things that people have been asking for white in Commander if you can actually have enough Venture cards to pull it off consistently.
All right. So that's a dungeon mechanic. We have more dungeon cards, though. I mean, the set is called Dungeons and Dragons. We have Eliwick Tumblestrom, a new planeswalker. 2 green, 4 starting loyalty. Legendary planeswalker Eliwick. +1 venture into a dungeon. -2, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them and put it into your hand. If it's legendary, you gain 3 life. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. -7, you get an emblem with creatures you control have trample and haste and get +2/+2 for each differently named dungeon you've completed.
Man, that emblem is interesting. I mean, this card is
potentially +6/+6
yeah,
trample haste.
But
if you manage to venture out of the middle
3
of this,
dungeons,
like 12 times.
Yeah, many times. Yeah,
yeah. But on the bright side, you know, Eliwick themselves also go venture through the dungeon, right? By just +1. So that actually is a lot better than it may seem. Like, holy cow, you get to go and like example like that could expedite your dungeon of the Mad Mage. This could really just speed stuff up, and it's not like, you know, these dungeons do nothing when you go through the levels. So you could potentially get a body out of this. You could potentially, you know, gain some life out of this. So that +1 is actually very flexible. So I think that's a pretty sweet card. And then imagine like actually using Lost Mine of Fandelver and going Fungi Cavern to shrink a creature for a turn. So there's a lot that you could do with that +1.
Yeah, this is a really tricky planeswalker to evaluate. It is maybe the narrowest planeswalker that we've ever seen, at least on the short list. Like, you pretty much got to be caring heavily about Venture and Dungeons to even consider playing Eliwick. Like, without that being something your deck is interested in, I can't really imagine playing it. Like, if this is your only Venture card, I don't think that'd be worth it. On a dedicated Venture deck, though, where your plan is to try to complete dungeons and get to that ultimate, Eliwick seems pretty strong as an option in that deck. My biggest concern, though, is really not great at protecting itself. You mentioned a couple of dungeon levels that can kind of do it, but even that, like, you can't hit those immediately unless you have other Venture cards that are coming down the same turn as Eliwick, which would probably be a challenge. So I'm a little worried that it's going to just come down Venture and then get Lovestruck Beasted or Ember Cleaved or whatever, because it doesn't really have a way to prevent itself from just immediately getting attacked. So that would be my concern with Eliwick. Although in a dedicated Venture/dungeon deck, it seems like it could be a pretty reasonable top end of the curve, and the ultimate is a really big payoff if you get to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly as you said. It's kind of hard to like actually evaluate the card, but yeah.
Can't you just play this like in a non-Venture deck, just a creature heavy deck? Like, if you take that +1, like, what is the average value? Like a Scry 2? Like, let's say you always just take Mad Mage Dungeon, right? You Scry 1, you gain a life, you ramp, you Scry 2, you draw 2, Scry 3. By the time you ultimate, like, I'm pretty sure Mad Wizard's Lair is better than your ultimate, where you draw 3 cards and play 1 for free. Like, does that make it playable? Like, you didn't need to make a food deck to make Oko work, right? Like, just making the food and alching it was good enough. Like, is this good enough as like some value off that +1? And then you're mainly doing it for the -2, where you get to basically draw a creature from your deck.
I'm skeptical. I think the big reason I'm skeptical is we have quite a few seemingly strong 4-mana planeswalkers in Standard, and they just really don't see much play. Like, Teferi, Master of Time is a really strong card that defends itself and generates card advantage and all this stuff. That doesn't really see play. Or like Elspeth Sun's Nemesis, there's Liliana's and Narsets, and just none of these planeswalkers are really staples. And at a glance, Eliwick looks a little bit weaker than the rest of the 4-mana planeswalkers to me. So I guess my thinking would be, like, if Teferi, Master of Time isn't good enough to be like a real staple in Standard, is Eliwick gonna be? I kind of lean towards no on that one.
I the reason why I think that Eliwick would is because maybe finishing dungeons might matter, or just getting it started, depending on what's like in the set for venturing and whatnot, and like things that care about the dungeons. I think Eliwick Eliwick is definitely a role player.
Yeah, well, yeah. I think if you're playing a dungeon deck, I would agree with you. But just playing this in the dark, what do you think about that, Krim? Like, no other venture cards in your deck. You're just using Eliwick itself to try to go through the dungeons. Like,
I don't know. I mean, that second ability, this is very much meant for a creature deck, right? So,
yeah, not Krim decks.
Yeah. You won't see it in anything that I'd normally be playing. I don't know if I'm just +1ing for a dungeon. Unless control gets like randomly this overhaul where it's just like bunch of control decks. I have like all creatures, and I don't know how that would be, but yeah. Otherwise, I think this is very much so just a creature heavy planeswalker deck.
Your control deck has a creature. It's Cradle the Death God, the 4/4. You just get 2 Annihilation and aggro people down.
If maybe like that -2 also said like look for like a land or something like that, then sure.
All right.
Yeah.
Last card is not really a card. It's Evolving Wilds, but it has a new frame. I don't know how to describe it. It's called Classic Module. It looks like the old D&D books. It's like purple with yellow text, and it's like old school art. It has all kinds of extra text on it. Like it says Dungeon Module C7, Evolving Wilds, and Adventure for character levels 1 to 4. What do you guys think of this new frame that definitely doesn't look like a Magic card? It has extra text on it now.
Okay, this looks like the most fake card I've ever seen in my life. But like even more like fake than the metal cards, all the movie posters. This looks so fake. But as somebody who has not played I've played a little bit of D&D. I think I played like half of a campaign. But as somebody who is not really like familiar with the world of D&D, I think this thing looks awesome. It is so jarring and very weird to look at, but I love this art style. So I mean, it appeals to me. I can't wait to see what it does for like, non-lands, like Evolving Wilds, like sure, but like imagine they somehow found a way to get Questing Beast to have more text on it, right? Like if they make something like a Questing Beast or a Tiamat, but like in this Dungeons and Dragons style or border, it's gonna be overwhelming to look at, but it just seems really cool.
Yeah, I think I don't really have any nostalgia for D&D. I've never been a D&D player, so I don't think I've ever even actually seen a dungeon module or whatever the book is. Yeah, obviously, that's what I guessed that it was. It looks like a book. So yeah. I don't really have any nostalgia for it. I would say I think it looks pretty cool. I don't think this is like top tier showcase cards for me. I think like the Ikoria, like comic book ones, or Throne of Eldraine, the like storybook ones. I think those are like the top tier of showcase cards. But I would say that these new dungeon modules or classic modules, whatever they're calling them, I think they're fine. I think solid mid tier showcase style for me.
I think it's the greatest card ever made. I've played 0 Dungeons and Dragons, okay? But I do know what like 80s era books look like, right? And this definitely gives off that vibe. And it's so weird that I need to have it, right? And we have an upcoming Commander Clash podcast where you guys tell me not to play Evolving Wilds. Well, forget that. Like, what if you have this sweet, alternate art Evolving Wilds that has to go in your deck, right? We got to jam it in somewhere. It looks so cool. What do I do with it? I don't know. It's Evolving Wilds, but it's going in a deck somewhere.
Maybe they just throw fetches in, and then we get some pretty cool like dungeon module fetch lands that aren't Evolving Wilds. So, I mean, I like it. I would love my lands to look like this, but like, holy cow, is this sweet?
I wonder if this could be. Could this be like Mystical Archives? Like, we haven't really gotten much information about the set yet. Is there any chance that they're going to have like cool reprints, or do you think it's all just going to be cards from the main set? We haven't really heard any gimmick for the set yet. And we've had some in other recent sets, so I keep wondering if they're going to have anything similar to Mystic Archives in the set, or if they're just trusting that D&D is like that's enough of a pull on its own to sell the set. So fetches would be very interesting in that border, though. I would love an old 80s book, Scalding Tarn or whatever.
I think you have to like play this and have, I don't know, synthwave or whatever, like in Strange Things. You have to like play it the whole time. You have to hear it or Hotline Miami, like something along those lines, right? But I'm curious, like, you know, what else they've got in this border? Like, is there going to be like an Eliwick or some kind of planeswalker in this border? Like, or is this only lands and like maybe a spell? Because like, I think this would be just such a cool thing, and I don't know how you would do it as a planeswalker, but I'd love to see it.
All right, I think those are all the cards. We have some random commons and uncommons, but I don't think they're worth going over. You can check out all the cards at MTGpreviews.com, and of course, previews start in earnest tomorrow. So starting from tomorrow, we're going to get a lot of new Dungeons & Dragons cards.
Yeah, so more spoilers coming up next couple weeks. I think we'll be in spoiler season, so we will have tons to talk about next podcast, I'm sure. But let's move on and hit up another topic. We got a little bit of Modern Horizons 2 news on MODO in specific, where apparently Modern Horizons 2 is so popular it is overwhelming the loan programs. Card Hoarder recently announced that they were suspending, I think is the pausing new applications for the loan program. So if you're already in the loan program, you're good. But if you're trying to get into it, they're pausing that for the time being. I guess the other big loan program, Mana Traders, from what I've been hearing feedback wise, has been out of a lot of cards people wanted, where people have been complaining about not being able to get fetch lands or some of the hot new cards from Modern Horizons 2 because there's just not enough supply. What do you think about Modern Horizons 2? Like, is MODO back on the menu? Is Modern Horizons 2 like reinvigorating the modern format and Magic Online as a client? Is that where we're heading with this? Has it really been that big of a deal?
I mean, Modern Horizons 2 is like a pretty sweet set, right? Like everybody's going to want to play with the cards. They all look amazing. They all look fun. I mean, also we all miss Modern, right? Like, I mean, Modern kind of just fell off to the wayside for a little bit, but now it's like that we are focused on Modern, and with MODO it being the only way we can digitally play Modern, no surprises there.
Yeah, I think so. For new players, before all this Commander hype, okay, Modern was the darling format, right? Modern was the most popular format. Modern Horizons, the original Modern Masters, they've all always been great. Except Wizards kind of messed up Modern for the last like year or 2 years with all the new broken standard stuff. They fixed it with Modern Horizons 2. So Modern is in a really good spot again. And I think everyone who used to love Modern is back on MODO playing it, and maybe even some new players. And the thing is, I don't think it's just Modern Horizons 2. I think Modern is actually legitimately good. So I expect it to keep going forward. And if like this upcoming standard is not good, then people will just keep playing Modern. Like there's no reason to go to standards. So I think this is normal. Will the bubble pop? I don't know. Depends. But I've still been having a good time in Modern. I think it's a pretty good format. So hopefully that continues and nothing dramatic happens.
Fully agree with that.
I've been having a blast playing Modern too, and I think that it was kind of one of those perfect storm things where Modern Horizons 2 came out. It was absolutely awesome. Everyone loved it, super hyped for it, and just coincidentally, at the same time, Paper Magic is making its return, and people are finally able to go to their Modern F&M again for the first time in over a year in some places. So I think adding those two things together has been really, really big for Modern's recovery, and I think that it's probably going to continue. I would not be surprised if we start hearing, like they just announced a bunch of big Flesh and Blood tournaments. So competing TCGs are bringing back their like GP level events. I wouldn't be surprised that by this fall, maybe we're getting announcements about at least the beginning of next year for the return of Magic Fest, maybe SCG Tour returns, and those would probably very good for Modern as well. SCG Tour has supported Modern for a long time. I would assume they would go back to that. So I think Modern's in a great place, and I think Magic Online is in a shockingly great place. Like, we've been talking about the demise of Magic Online since Arena became a thing, really, but here we are several years later, and it just keeps chugging along and people keep playing it. So yeah, I think both Modern and Magic Online are in a really good spot right now.
The real test if dungeons work correctly.
No way. No
right?
way.
Like Wizards is like, I give up on half of the C21 cards. We'll just give you some C21. Like, I wonder if they give up on a standard set eventually. They're like, forget dungeons. This is too difficult.
Maybe it'll be fine, but I definitely am a little nervous about how dungeons will work. Anyway, speaking of digital Magic, we have another digital client in Magic Arena, and Magic Arena is doing a very interesting upcoming special event where they're taking cards that were banned over the last couple of years and nerfing them, changing them, errating them, whatever, to theoretically make them a little bit more fair. And in that event, you can play those cards. Richard, what do you think about this event? Anything I missed describing it?
No, it's an upcoming historic event where they have quote unquote fixed historic cards. So there are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 cards banned. And I guess we'll just briefly talk about how they were fixed, and then we can talk about the standouts here. So Agent of Treachery. Originally, when it enters the battlefield, you gain control of target permanent. Now you have to cast it from your hand. So that's the difference. Field of the Dead makes untapped zombie tokens at 7 or more different lands. Now they enter play tapped. So your zombies are now tapped in the fixed version. Fires of Invention.
Also, Field of the Dead is now legendary.
Oh, yep. I missed that.
Yep.
Oh, wait, what? That's huge. Okay, yep, it's legendary.
Yep.
Thanks, Seth. Fires of Invention is now red 3. So it's a double cast, I think. And
I think that's it.
There's a land clause? No, wait. No, that's the same land
There
clause.
was always a land clause.
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was always there.
Nexus of Fate now exiles itself. So you take a turn and then you exile itself. Also, it doesn't shuffle into your library again if it hits your graveyard. Our friend Oko here has been fixed. Still same cost, same starting loyalty. The +2 is now a +1. So when you make a food token, it's +1 instead of +2. I believe the rest is the same.
No. It's a minus. It's a -2 now to turn something into an elk.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Before.
No, yes. Okay. It used to be a +1 to turn into an elk.
Right.
Now it's a -2. Oh, they've really gutted Oko. Okay. Thank you, Krim. Omnath. So Omnath is, instead of drawing ETB, instead of drawing a card in the original version, it is now a Scry 1. And I believe the landfall triggers the exact same.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, the landfall triggers the exact same. So now it's just a Scry 1 instead of a draw. Once Upon a Time, same card except your free cast is now 1 mana.
One colorless, so that's
one colorless.
That's your generic. Sorry.
Or one generic mana, not one colorless. One generic mana. Teferi Time Raveler. Mr. Teferi is now, Little Teferi is now 4 CMC. To offset that, starts at 5 loyalty. Rest of the abilities are the same. Yes. So 4 mana Teferi. We have our friend Uro here. So previously, when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you gain 3 life, draw a card, and you put a land into play. The land part is now gone. So when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you gain 3 life and draw a card. So no ramping for Uro. Veil of Summer, same abilities. Now it's 2 CMC, 1 generic and green. Same abilities, so just increased mana costs. Wilderness Reclamation. Instead of untapping all your lands, you get to untap 2 lands. Still 4 CMC. And then last is Winota. When MODO attacks, you look at the top 4 cards instead of the top 6 cards. I believe the rest is the same. Yes.
Yeah.
So it's just 4 instead of 6. So those are the nerfs, some of them more extreme than the others. What do you guys think? What cards are now unplayable? What cards are pretty much basically the same?
Well, I think that cards that are pretty much going to still be very powerful are going to be Teferi, Veil of Summer. Those two still seem very powerful, despite Teferi costing 4 now. I think that's still definitely something that I would pay 4 mana for. Veil of Summer still seems like something that would make me miserable and upset. So yeah, like it's still a good card. And Wilderness Reclamation seems kind of just awful, like actually just awful. And a thing that I'm not sure about, like for me right now, I think Agent of Treachery having to be cast from your hand is very huge, right? Like I think that's way different because it can't be blinked anymore, you know, especially with it being rotated. It can't be like ephemerated, yada, yada, yada. It's got to be cast from your hand. So, but the fact here is that it is cast and not enters the battlefield. So that also does make it, that could actually balance it out, because that means you are going to steal something as long as it's cast. So we'll see how much that changes.
I think it still has to enter the battlefield.
Is
when
it?
it enters the battlefield,
Oh, wait,
if
hold
you
on.
cast it from your hand. So yeah, it's not like an Eldrazi trigger, so it still does have to resolve too.
Oh, then yeah, never mind. It's gotten, I think that makes it worse. That makes it definitely worse. Field of the Dead just seems like what it should have always been. But I think that Field of the Dead's still moderately powerful. Just it won't be like a 4 of, or maybe it will be. Who knows?
It wouldn't change anything in Commander with Field of the Dead. I mean, this is geared towards Historic, obviously, but it doesn't change the power level there at all. I think I mostly agree with Crim's analysis. I think Teferi is still pretty busted. I do think Veil of Summer, it does get a decent amount worse. Leaving up 2 mana is a lot harder than leaving up 1 mana. I don't think it's unplayable, but I do think that is a pretty big difference. I also think Uro's still pretty insane. Like, sure, you don't get to ramp with it, but the ETB/attack of gain 3 and draw a card and still being a 6/6 for 3 and all the other shenanigans, I think Uro is still really, really strong. I think Oko might be, well, I think the card that got the biggest downgrade is definitely Wilderness Wreck. I think Wilderness Wreck is stone unplayable now. Like, no one plays Wilderness Wreck. Oko might be second on that list for me. Like, just changing around the loyalty abilities where the +1 is 1 less, and then the +2 becomes a +1, and then the +1 becomes a -2. That is a huge, huge, huge shift. So you're not going to have these plus make a food, plus make an elk, plus make a food, plus make an elk, which made Oko so incredibly unbeatable. I actually think this version of Oko, I think it would still see play, but I actually think it definitely would not be the greatest planeswalker of all time. And I don't even know if it would be that strong if it had this setup.
I think that it's still pretty powerful. Like even like this -2, it hitting an artifact or a creature and just blanking it into a 3/3 is still quite powerful.
Yeah, I think it's still not bad, but you lose the steady stream of 3/3 every turn. You can't just keep doing that. I remember Okos with they up to 14 loyalty because they just keep plussing and then elking and plussing, and you're like, oh my god, how do I ever deal 14 damage to this Oko? Like, it's just always gonna do this, and I can never get rid of it. So at least that aspect I think would be a little fair. You're not gonna have Okos with 10 loyalty anymore, most likely.
Also, is Omnath like really that big of a change? Because I mean, not drawing a card, sure, that's pretty big there, but like, I do feel like Omnath and the landfall and like how easy it is to have landfall pop off is like a bigger problem.
It's probably still busted. Like, you do lose some of the immediate value, but you're still getting some. Scry 1 isn't bad, but yeah, I think that the landfall ramp ability is what made Omnath especially devastating. Just like being a free 4/4 if you can have 2 lands enter the battlefield, and that's still there. So I think Omnath, it is powered down to some extent. Obviously, drawing is better than scrying, but I still think it would be really really good. I think that version would be really strong. I think Nexus of Fate gets a ton worse too. It's still fine. 7 mana, instant speed, take an extra turn. That's still fine, but you wouldn't have Nexus deck anymore without the shuffle back in, do it again. It would play a ton differently. It would play like a traditional extra turn spell rather than its own unique thing that like created its own archetype that took over standard.
Yeah, I think this is a lot better for an extra turn spell. I mean, it is instant speed, so it's still quite powerful, but the fact that it goes away is huge. And on top of that, with us just getting rid of like, you know, Time Warp, and Velomachus can't cast this, so that means that they can't just like, you know, hit this and go infinite and or just kill you in 4 turns. So, you know, maybe Nexus of Fate this time around won't be miserable. But Fires of Invention, I think this card's still really good. I think they should have made it a little more taxing on the cost here. They could have left it at 4 if they wanted to, but what they should have done was just made it like triple red.
Ooh, I think make it hard to splash. Yeah.
Yeah. I think this needs to have more red pips in it here. Either triple or even all of it can just be red, quad red, and then just leave it at 4. Because right now, it just going up double red, still something you could play. It being 5 is a little bit different, but I mean, now you can go and play Fire's Invention, and instead of using like whatever the draw through time or not dig through time, but the one with the fish art on it, I can't remember, the 4 mana sorcery. But like instead of that, now you just play Fire's Invention, and you still could play a Cavalier. There's a lot you can still do at 5 mana, and it's just a turn slower.
Yeah, I think it does power it down to some extent, but I still think it would be pretty strong at 5 mana. I have a more meta perspective question for you, because this event has actually led to a pretty big conversation and a lot of controversy. So the question is twofold. So the debate that's going on is this event just a special, fun, quirky event, or is this some sort of test where Wizards is trying to figure out if they should errata cards like this, nerf cards like this for real outside of the special event? And secondly, what do you think of that idea? Like, is there any merit to, rather than banning Agent of Treachery, just changing the text or making your Field of the Dead legendary or doing these things here for broader Magic outside of this special event? So what do you think about that, Richard?
Yes. So I think it's both, right? It can be a fun event. At the same time, they'll look at the data. But I think for broader Magic, I don't think it matters. I think Wizards has figured out competitive Magic doesn't matter. Balancing standard isn't that important. So why go through the headache of errataing cards and affecting casual players, right? Like if you errata a card, this affects the commander table as well, right? Why bother when it's not relevant to your bottom line? So I would say with Wizards' focus on like non-competitive Magic and the fact that standard has been bad, but it hasn't affected them in any way, I feel they wouldn't stir the pot here and bother like errating cards. Like, what's the point?
What do you think, Grim?
Okay, so yeah, I think to the first part, yes, they are looking at the data from this, but the big thing here is, oh my God, Wizards finally realized they're a digital game. They have a digital client. They are now they should have done this a long time ago, and I think they should keep doing this because paper Magic and all that, like and whatnot, like yeah, like you don't affect the more casual players and whatnot. You can just errata things for like, you know, the more like I think a lot of digital or a lot of competitive Magic can go digital, right? And if that's the case, then you just errata things as it needs to be. So this way you can keep your competitive formats or you know, you like standards and or I mean like digital standard, historic and maybe even other digital formats to like update it so that it's always changing and you can fix how you want, and like do what Hearthstone did. Whenever anything got too powerful, you could just kind of like, hey, in the snap of your fingers, we'll just change how it works. And then we're going to see how that runs. And if we don't like it, we roll it back. And then we wait until we figure out how to fix the card again. So I think this is a great thing to have happen for digital Magic. At least on Arena. I don't know if MODO will adapt it, but I love the idea of just being able to fix things on the go. It means that, we don't have to sit around for 1,000 years and wait for a banning. They could just update it in a week or 2 weeks, and then roll it back if they don't like it.
Oh man, if Magic was digital only, I would be totally down with it. I do feel like I really want cards to play the same everywhere. It would be really, really weird to me if Veil of Summer was 2 mana on Arena, but 1 mana in paper. Something that would just be incredibly, incredibly strange. That's just so convoluted and complicated. So I tend to lean towards not liking that as a solution right now.
Magic's already convoluted and complicated. So I've seen no real issues with adding just one more step to it.
I argue that they should do different mulligan rules for different formats, because London mulligan rule is bad for Modern, and Wizards nah, that's way too convoluted. So if you can't have a different mulligan rule for Modern than for Standard, how can you have different cards for different clients? That just seems so over the top to me. But what were you saying, Richard?
So would it be better to have the card behave the same across digital and paper? So i.e. your paper cards don't do what they read, or would it be better to have it split where they actually just do different things depending if you're playing digital or paper? Which ones are you guys advocating for?
I like the latter. I prefer the latter. Being able to, I know that it would do something different than the paper version, but this is your way of taking advantage of, once again, a digital space. It gives you way more wiggle room for testing cards out, testing out fixes, and it's a way to maybe spice up the digital, when Standard's stale, or when Standard is currently in a rough patch of just miserable cards. You can change that.
I'm on the other side where I lean towards not doing it at all. I love it for the special event, but I lean towards not doing it at all as far as real formats and in the game as a whole. But if they were going to do it, I think I would prefer that cards played the same everywhere, even if it made paper a little clunky. And I think I've moved a little bit more in that direction recently, just because we keep getting so many changes. We just had 250 cards add Phyrexian added on as a creature type. We have 20 different versions of each card, most of them not even looking like Magic cards at all. There's already a lot of complexity that's been added in the last couple of years to paper Magic cards. So if we did have to do erratas in nerfs, and that's what Wizards decide to do, I would rather the card play the same everywhere, and people just have to look it up on Scryfall, the Gather, or whatever, and get the Oracle text, which you're gonna have to do for some cards anyway. If you get a Japanese mystical archive that you can't read and you crack a pack, what are you gonna do? You're gonna look it up on Gather. That doesn't seem like a huge deal breaker to me at this point, even if it's maybe not completely ideal.
Full art cryptic ahead of its time. Ready to get errated with the 5th clause or something.
Yeah.
No problem. My card supports that.
Interesting. It'll be interesting. And I will say I'm at least excited to play the event and see how much these fixes actually matter, how much do they actually work. So whether or not they implement it wide, I think the event's a cool idea.
Yeah, the event is pretty cool. I mean, I as I said, I want this to happen throughout Arena. And maybe Arena can be the testing grounds, right? Hey, what if we tried it just for a little bit, see if the cards did different things, right? Would it even affect people in the world of paper? So
if they were going to do it, the one place I might be on board would be Historic, because Historic is already its own weird thing. It doesn't exist in paper. I think my concern would be if you did it for everything. Wouldn't it be super strange if we had an Arena tournament and a SCG Open on the same weekend that were Standard, and your deck was playable on Arena but not in paper because your cards didn't work the same? That would be really awkward. But I think Historic is uniquely situated where you can do whatever you want. Like, it's not a paper format. You could make historic versions of whatever. They already put tons of random cards into the format. It's got arena exclusive cards that don't exist in paper are legal and historic, apparently, which I didn't even realize until recently when I came across them in my collection and realized they work. So we're already so far down that road with historic. I guess I would probably be okay with that for historic and specific.
But I mean, what if, like, you know, the SCG event is normal paper rolls, right? And like cards function how they read. But that, like, let's say that format, that standard sucks, right? It's absolutely abysmal. But then there's an online tournament and you get to, like, the fixes are actually amazing and, you know, standards like thriving online. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's the what I'm getting at there is, like, there's a chance that you could fix a dead format or a stale format. And it comes at the cost that maybe it does, like, you know, it only is online. Or maybe you have the online changes then transfer over to paper if it's doing well enough. But I think that something like this gives us the opportunity to breathe new life into a format.
I do like that aspect.
Especially if we aren't rotating faster. Right?
Yeah, I would rather try like faster rotation or things like that first, because this seems like a pretty extreme path to take as far as standard as a whole. But I do like fresh formats, and that would be appealing to me. I do think there's a cost to it as far as like just weirdness and complexity, and like you see some streamer playing a cool deck and you're like, well, I want to play that my F&M, and then you go to play the F&M and find out that none of the cards are the same, that they're all different, and that would just be really awkward. My other concern, and we're probably going way too deep into this topic, but I kind of feel like if you know that the cards that you make can change at any time, then you can just print whatever busted thing you want because you figure you'd be able to fix it later. Like, I kind of feel that's what some other games do. So I'd be a little worried that we would get a lot more broken things if Wizards didn't design thinking this card's going to exist for the next 25 years, so we got to get it right. If they're thinking, we can tweak some things on this card, a couple weeks from now if we go a little too far, I feel like that might lead to us getting a ton of Okos and Uros and Skull Clamps and whatnot.
I mean, yeah, there is potential that could happen. That is true. But I mean, I guess I'm more so just on the hopeful side because, like, they've got to do something, right? Like this would be great to see, like, the changes happen in person, or it happen quicker. But it could lead to Okos. It could lead to more of that. But who knows?
Yeah. Who knows? What do you think on all this, Richard? You haven't chimed in too much on this one. Any thoughts?
I want my cards to play the same. I don't want them to change it, but at the same time, like, Magic is changing. If most people are playing on digital, then, like, paper players shouldn't hold back digital. So it's really going to depend on, like, where this goes. But like Seth said, we have Phyrexian cards, we have Japanese cards, we have cards with text that's not legible. Like, does it really matter anymore? We have dungeons with like 8,000 words on them. Like, yeah, you're gonna have to use something to look up card text. So maybe that is fine. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, and, like, remember, you gotta think of it like this though, Richard. Like, this is all we've known, right? As in the way that we've played Magic, it's all we've known. What if we just try this other way, where we have, like, cards that function different online, right? Like, we're used to it being the same everywhere, but what if this, like, actually works out?
Yeah, but I don't have faith in WotC on this. Like, I feel their efforts are devoted towards Commander and Secret Lair, and that doing this requires a lot of change, and it could backfire and blow up in their face. So I feel like they just won't touch it, and they just.
But they could easily
do
just
Universes Beyond.
They could just easily digital. It's all digital.
But you can't just be like, we're changing how Magic cards work now, right? And it's all going to be like this. But maybe, like, something like Krim was mentioning, they could test it by making this historic event permanent. So you always have this alternate historic queue going. And then if that's popular enough, one day it just replaces the real historic queue. But like I said, I think this is a lot of work for them for competitive Magic, which I think is not high on their totem pole anymore. They're printing just like commander cards and standard sets and printing more secret layers. And they probably spent way more time on the classic modules than like actually balancing the set. So I don't know, right? I feel like their focus is not on top tier competitive formats anymore.
Oh, well, I think we probably better leave that topic there. We're getting to the end of our cast. Richard, do we have any fish mail we can sneak in real quick on our way out the door this week?
All right. If you have questions, send them to @MTGGoldfish with the hashtag MTGFishmail, and we'll get to your questions on air. Truth of Wasps. Why not have secret layers funding World's prize pool? League and Dota do similar things. Secret layer worlds.
I mean, that sounds like a wonderful idea to me. I'm pretty sure the answer is Wizards would, or Hasbro would, prefer the money going in their pockets than going to the community, I think is the bottom line. But yeah, that always seemed like an obvious thing to me. Like, I think the community would spend a lot of money on a secret layer to support something like Worlds or a big invitational or something. But yeah, I mean, in the end, Wizards could sell that same secret layer and keep all the profits, and that seems to be what they choose to do.
Exactly. It's like, well, why do that when they could just keep all the money? Right. I mean, and I don't think that's something they could easily do, but they won't do.
I think they should do it. Like, they shouldn't take a generic secret layer. Like, they shouldn't be like, all secret layer money's going to Worlds, but they could do like invitational series. Like, you buy, I don't know, name some standard staple that's a human, except it's Paulo on it now, right? And then, 50% of the money made for the secret layer goes to World's prize pool. Right. And then you have like a set of like 5 like big name pros that are headlining the secret layer. And for this drop specifically, it funds Worlds. I think if it flops, then they know no one cares about Worlds and they'll never do it again. If it's a success, then this is how they fund their like $10 million Worlds prize pool or whatever, like every year. Right. Like, this is the reason why Dota can have those giant prize pools, because like people contribute to it by buying stuff. And that is like a guaranteed way to make that. It's like the lottery, right? The lottery is like very expensive because the money's guaranteed, right? It's just coming from people, right? If there's no interest, the lottery is small. If there's a lot of interest, the lottery is big. So same thing here. So I actually do think they should do it. Like, bring back invitational cards, secret layer.
It would also save the PR hit of announcing $1 million prize pool and then cutting it to $250,000. Like, it seems like selling a secret layer and making up the difference would be a good PR move if you had to choose between those two things. So,
all right. Last question, since we're running long. 2D dimensional. With MH2 meta starting to settle, which of these cards do you think could see a banning in the next 6 months? Urza Saga, Ragavan, Asmore, Circle of Loyalty.
I mean, there's only one answer here. We already know the answer. The most broken card from Magic's most broken set, Circle of Loyalty, for sure.
No, definitely. That is the one that we are writing off immediately. That is totally fine.
What's the second one on the hit list after this broken card is removed from the format? Saga, Ragavan, or
Saga?
Asmore?
Saga, 100% Saga.
Ooh, I'm gonna go Ragavan. I mean, I don't think Asmore's in the conversation for me at this point.
Yeah.
If I could, I would choose both of Saga and Ragavan potentially being banned. Ragavan has seen a huge increase in play in just the last couple of weeks. It's the most expensive card of the set. It is seeing a ridiculous amount of play across archetypes. We'll see. But I think both of those have some shot at being banned in the next 6 months. Not calling for banning or anything like that, just so it's clear, but I think there's a chance.
I am calling for a banning, and it is on Urza Saga.
I think all of them are fine. I think the answer is none, but I actually think Asmore has the greatest chance of eventually getting a ban when we get like some critical mass of weird graveyard shenanigans, because it does something like really weird, and it only takes like an additional broken card to break it. Ragavan is just like a quote-unquote fair creature that you can remove. Urza Saga is kind of slow, and I don't know. It's just like value-y, but it's not too much. But like, they could print another graveyard card or something to like totally break Asmore. So I feel that's the most dangerous space it's in. The other two are just like quote-unquote fair Magic cards, and it's not too bad. So that's all the time we have for questions this week. Thank you for everyone who sent them in. If you have questions, send them to @MTGGoldfish with the hashtag MTGFishmail, and we'll get to your questions on air.
And I believe that brings us to the end of episode 335 of the MTGGoldfish podcast. So Richard, Krim, thanks for hanging out. Thanks to everyone for listening. Thanks to Card Conduit for supporting the show. And we will be back next week to talk about new spoiler cards for sure, and whatever else goes on in the world of Magic. So until then, everyone, have a great week, and this is the crew signing out.